Well, good evening. Thank you for coming out this evening. We have such competition from the weather this evening. I was thinking, oh, it looks really attractive out there. Oh, I wonder. But I'm grateful to have all of you this evening so that we can explore this area together. My topic for the evening is the authoritarian personality, and it is a subject that I have been interested in off and on for years, beginning with graduate school at the University of Washington. World War II, the greatest of all man-made events, some say. And so much came out of World War II. Oh, I have a note here and I have to discharge that and then we'll restart. I have to tell you that though I am a licensed counselor, what I say is not necessarily representative of other counselors. I'm not speaking for the counseling field. I'm not speaking for the Counselor Licensure Board. These are my personal views. Okay. Well, and World War II brought a situation where much passed away. William Butler Yeats said, "Things show themselves passing away." And we have a lot that we saw and learned from and came about because of World War II. I'm one of them. My father and mother probably would not have met were it not for World War II. So someone else might be here tonight, but it wouldn't be me. And it changed the world in so many ways. One of the things that it did was bring into being, into a high pitch, the phenomenon of modern dictatorship, 20th century dictatorship. And I was very interested in the subject. So let's let that episode in the life of the world tell us some things that may be applicable today. Because as I look around the world, I see any number of things which are related to authoritarianism, to dictatorship, to a mass movement in favor of dictatorship and authoritarianism. Having this knowledge, I think, can be preparatory for us to identify where we stand in the world, preparatory to help the world, the nation, our communities, even our families. And so we can use, I think, some of the knowledge that comes from the authoritarian personality studies. So what I propose to do for the evening is to take a look at the thought and writing of Theodor Adorno on the authoritarian personality. Now, the authoritarian personality. Adorno was one of those people, one of those German psychologists who escaped Nazi Germany in time. Erich Fromm was another. Some did not, and still they survived. And they brought with us more wisdom about the human condition. So Adorno came to this country and he decided he wanted to figure out how it was that his life and the lives of so many in Europe just got swallowed up. And it happened quickly, and it happened with relative ease, and it was shocking. In our time, we see ideas of individuals, of groups, change markedly, or so it seems, and in a quick period of time. And it's important that we should understand some things about that. I have at least been fascinated by this. Now, what Adorno found in his extensive studies at the University of California, Berkeley, with others who had had the same experience in Europe and who were interested in the same sort of human phenomena, what he found was, and this is his original, this is not his original book, this belongs to the University of Idaho, or I'll have to send it back in a few days. The book title is The Authoritarian Personality, and this one comes from 1952, I believe, 1950. When they had completed their studies, he and his associates kicked out this very thick volume. At its core is the teaching that there are certain personality potentials, certain traits which seem to predispose people toward authoritarian beliefs. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just kind of go down the list with you. There are 9 of them. They somewhat overlap, as we'll see when we go down, and then we can kind of rally at the end, summarize a bit, and we can either call it good at that point and have discussion. We can go on a little bit to compare the functioning of the authoritarian personality with the functioning which Carl Jung promoted in his life work on human individuation, which is the process of healthy human development as he saw it. So, authoritarian personality. What are some of the characteristics? Okay, number 1, conventionalism. Conventionalism, the adherence to conventional values determined by external social pressure and anti-intellectualism. Okay, so you go along with the group, you don't question, you keep conventional values even when you don't particularly believe in them, which was an interesting hitch. Let's see, let's read 1 or 2 of the items that were used that indicated one should, item number 19, see, he did a checklist, and people were asked to identify how much they agreed or disagreed with any given statement. And then these were analyzed, and they broke out these 9 factors. So, conventionalism, one of the, and every one of the things that I will read out to you are things that agreement with is agreement with them is a sign of potential authoritarianism. One should avoid doing things in public which appear wrong to others, even though one knows that these things are really all right. A measure of conventionalism. There is too much emphasis in college on intellectual and theoretical topics, not enough emphasis on practical matters and on the homely virtues of living. So, do you get the drift that This person might, in a way, be inclined to agree with the mass of people as they go along. Now, don't challenge what everybody is supposed to believe and think. Conventionalism. Authoritarian submission. Well, it's fairly clear how that would be helpful to an authoritarian ruler. And let's take a couple of items here and just get the flavor of how that went. Authoritarian submission. He is indeed contemptible who does not feel an undying love, gratitude, and respect for his parents. Submission. Obedience and respect for authority are the most important virtues children should learn. What this country needs is fewer laws and agencies and more courageous, tireless, devoted leaders whom people can put their faith in. And we will get at the end to a consideration of how these things might have arisen in any given life, because there are different ideas and different authorities. So time permitting, we'll kind of come back to the development of these potentials, of these tendencies. Okay, number 3, authoritarian aggression. I'm sorry, my skill with the Sharpie here is, you may notice a significant improvement as we go through the evening. Okay, authoritarian aggression, after authoritarian submission. Some items that indicate this. It is only natural and right that women be restricted in certain ways in which men have more freedom. Another item, authoritarian aggression. Homosexuality is a particularly rotten form of delinquency and ought to be severely punished. So, okay, authoritarian aggression and submission make compatible partners. I will read you at times some of the things that Adorno wrote. With respect to authoritarian submission, he wrote, "The individual who has been forced to give up basic pleasures and to live under a system of rigid restraints, and who therefore feels put upon, is likely not only to seek an object on which he can take it out, but also be particularly annoyed by the idea that the other person is getting away with something." Okay, frustration, aggression. Okay, the fourth one, little odd, the language, anti-introception. It's unusual language, but I think we have kind of, I think you can kind of get the idea. And anti-interception is an attitude of impatience with and opposition to the subjective and tender-minded. Okay. It might well be a mark. Oh, well, we'll get back to that. We'll get to that one later with a weak ego. Out of touch with large areas of his own inner life, the anti-interceptive person is afraid of what might be revealed, out of touch with large areas of his own inner life. He is afraid of what might be revealed if he or others should look closely at himself. The general attitude easily leads to a devaluation of the human and an over-evaluation of the physical object. When at its most extreme, human beings are looked upon as if they were physical objects, to be coldly manipulated, even while physical objects, now vested with emotional appeal, are now treated with loving care. So it is the opposite of a humanitarian outlook. There's a couple items. There are some things too intimate or personal to talk about, even with one's closest friends. What a man does is not so important, so long as he does it well. Okay. The next item, what are we doing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Superstition. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? These kind of things start to pop up, and we start to see some of the inner structure of a set of beliefs. You know? Superstition and stereotypy. Couple of items. This study was done during World War II, by the way. The set of the checklist we are going through was collectively a form called the California F scale. F standing for pre-fascism. Superstition. World War II. It so happened that in World War II, the Japan experienced an earthquake. And so the superstitious person might be inclined to say, it is more than a remarkable coincidence that Japan had an earthquake on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1944. Another item, every person should have a deep faith in some supernatural force higher than himself, to which he gives total allegiance and whose decisions he does not question. In some ways, with this, we see perhaps a person who has, in a sense, given up on trying to figure out how the world works and what his place is in it, and how he can control his fate. And can you see how that might contribute to someone coming along and said, oh, you don't know how things work? Let me tell you. Or you're having a hard time managing your life? Let me manage it for you. Okay. So you see after a while the drift that's coming here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Does that,
yes.
Can that higher person be God himself or herself?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I think that's what is implied. That's what I inferred from the statement, Bill. Every person should have a deep faith in some supernatural force higher than himself, here's the kicker, I think, to which he gives total allegiance and whose decisions he does not question.
I think that's the key, that last part.
That's the key, yes, I agree. So let's look for somebody who can fill that void. Okay. Okay, the next one. Power and toughness. All right. So as I read these, it strikes me that some of these kinds of features seem to me a little bit like a plug, The plug is fitted to fit right in to that device that emits the electricity. I mean, they're kind of aimed at each other. Power and toughness. There are some activities so flagrantly un-American that when responsible officials won't take the proper steps, the wide-awake citizen should take the law into his own hands. Power, toughness, will. No insult to our honor should ever go unpunished. It's a tough world out there. You just better, be tough. And if you don't think you can be tough, I'll be tough for you. Okay. Yeah, and Adorno makes quite a bit out of this. For example, in short, the power complex contains elements that are essentially contradictory. And we should expect that sometimes one feature and sometimes another will predominate at the surface level. What I believe he means by that is there is a great reverence in the person with an authoritarian personality. There is a great reverence toward power and toughness. Sometimes he might feel expanded by exercising toughness over another, while at another time he could feel expanded by identifying with the great leader. I think there's someone, Kevin, might be wanting to get in. So, all right. Comes one of my favorites. Destructiveness. And cynicism. Okay. We see this so often in the authoritarian ruler. He, people who feel kind of helpless and oppressed think that the ruler is going to be their bully. The bully is going to be on their side. And it so often does not work out that way. Destructiveness and cynicisms. Americans are getting so far from the true American way of life that force may be necessary to restore it. And here are the reports of atrocities. Those would be referring to the Holocaust, because the book was, the scale was developed during World War II. Reports of atrocities in Europe have been greatly exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Oh, it didn't take place. You know, you people are getting too sensitive. You're imagining things. No matter how they act on the surface, men are interested in women for only one reason. When you come right down to it, it's human nature never to do anything without an eye to one's own profit. So we have the cynicism, often overlapping with destructiveness. Next, projectivity. This is one that I see quite a bit these days. Projectivity. Projectivity is about blame, really. It's about, and particularly this kind of projectivity is about, I feel guilty, unworthy. I have done things that I am not proud of, things that cause me a certain amount of revulsion. But my way of handling that is to say, oh, Bill, that dirty thing you did, it's to put it on somebody else. You know, there is a very powerful man that you can almost always tell what he's doing because he blames other people in the ways that reflect his own functioning. It's kind of like the guy gives you a roadmap. And so projectivity. And do you see that in projectivity, this can match up with things like authoritarian submission, authoritarian aggression, that, you know, if we are going to hurt these people, defeat these people, eliminate these people, they deserve it. They deserve it because they're to blame for my unhappiness. So, moving along, destructiveness and cynicism. Projectivity, and I think we're getting close here. Let's see if I left one out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This one's kind of interesting. Sex. And let's see some items. Let me see if that sheds some light for us. Homosexuality, we had an earlier item on that. No matter how they act on the surface, men are interested in women only for one reason. Sex crimes such as rape and attacks on children deserve more than mere imprisonment. Such criminals ought to be publicly whipped. The understanding, and this brings us kind of to, if we want to, cross the boundary and talk about where all this stuff comes from, what gives rise to this, as it seems like it's a fairly common phenomenon, as Adorno described it, and I think it comes to about 30% of the population that he saw at that time. Ego-alien sexuality. The idea here is consistent with authoritarian submission, authoritarian aggression, conventionalism. They all kind of come together. The idea is that the person who responds to these sexually toned items very strongly, what he's trying to do is manage his own sexuality or her own sexuality. And so, you know, there's an old story that comes to mind of Macsweeney and the priest. And Macsweeney was going through the footpath, and the priest came along. Nana Mahswini was a poet, and poets write words, and the words can be used for songs. So the priest said, Mahswini, why are you writing all those dirty songs? And Mahswini said, they are not dirty songs, it's your own dirty mind. And that's kind of the thrust of the sexual items in the California F scale, which is the full title of this. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to. Okay, projectivity. It seems to me that there are some when these work together, when they identify an enemy, when they focus destructiveness on the enemy, when there is the complete conviction that I'm right and that person is wrong, that that adds a special kick to the destructiveness, and that many people like that kind of destructiveness. They like the feeling of being outraged at someone's bad behavior, and now we're going to go do something about those people. So there's so Adorno's taught that high F scale people that showed these characteristics are pre-receptive to authoritarian and political and religious messaging. And his study has held up quite well. It is still published. It is still the product, it stimulates research. And I was so struck by it because it seems to me to speak to something that, well, world societies are certainly experiencing nowadays in various ways. But also American history has been experiencing some of these things. Now, the kicker, I think, is just like the three-prong plug that goes into the three-prong socket, these things are like the three-prong plug. There's generally something needed to stick it in the socket and let the energy flow. And that seems to be external stimulation. You know, Goebbels, Dr. Goebbels, the Nazi chief of propaganda, said, we could not have accomplished what we accomplished without radio. But once you get the right, once you're singing in the right key, this can stimulate astonishing compliance, in my view, in a group of people. And that brings us to another topic, which I won't get into tonight, but which I think is of great importance for those of us who are interested in this and interested in the dangerous parts of it. And that is the pollution of the mental environment due to the closing in of discussion, the closing in of money as a control. The people who lead movements where this is characteristic generally do so with the approval of, and in order to protect and benefit, the well-to-do. Mussolini made that deal. Yeah. Hitler made that deal. We'll take care of you. We'll make sure you have what you get what you want. You just don't criticize us. Or now actively support us. Bill, we can have a bit of discussion here if you want. This is probably a good place to kind of pause and you look like you had something to say, Bill.
I was just saying how much this fits our political situation right now, and especially with social media focusing that it's the plug. It brings that personality type together into a powerful energy source, and it was interesting that it's estimated that 30% of Americans today, you said 30% have this personality type, and right before the meeting, I think Lewis was saying 30% of the people in America today are, the Trumpers and the people who are very supportive of the right wing. I thought that was an interesting percentage.
Yes. Maybe you've had experiences that I've had in that there were people who seemed kind of ordinary and sensible, and over a period of time there's this change in them, and the thing that's added to the equation, that's added to the liquid, is this note of stimulation.
Got it.
That's what it took to become a good member. I was raised in a very religious family. So when I essentially rejected or began that rejection process beginning in high school and college, I became obviously the black sheep of the family, of the community neighborhood oftentimes. So when I moved to San Francisco in the 1960s, I was in heaven. That was my place,
Right.
It was a wonderful experience, and the information here also was taken up by the marketing and advertising community, essentially beginning in the Second World War to a great extent, because they could see what propaganda was doing for the Nazis and Goebbels' message that was out there that was not lost on the advertising community in the United States. And they picked up and built off of that. And today we have an example of what we see every day in our radio, our TV, our news media. Everything we have oftentimes is simply an extension of what these principles are. And you know that you're going to gather in about a third of the population with that message. They're going to grab a hold of it. They're going to run with it. And there's nothing that you can say that's going to disestablish them from that belief system. It is so inculcated in their subconscious that there's no amount of factual information that's going to change that. And I found that to be very true. So this is a continuation, and to a large extent what I see in terms of someone following the belief system oftentimes is what radio stations they listen to, what TV stations, what news sources they get as well. Because that's only going to reinforce, if you're in the advertising business, you're going to advertise something that you know is going to get into somebody's subconscious and cause them to come back. Right. Because you're going to get higher advertising rates. It's as simple as that. It's simply the profit motive. So this has been around for some period of time. My life experience, I'm 85 years old now, has told me this is absolutely true. This is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. The gentleman in back.
Well, I was thinking about a title of a book by Alan Watts called The Wisdom of Insecurity. And we couple that with the notion of the deep, difficult work of individuation, of leaving certain types of certainty, of leaving certain types of conditioning. That it would seem to me in our conventional practices in the culture, and especially as reflected in certain religious practices, you're not asked about discernment. You're not asked about discernment. You're expected to be obedient. So obedience is a key factor for folks to receive these kinds of messages. Also, that there is a source of truth, and it is in the book. It's all been there in the book. It's always there. And then we have to have, and you can watch the Sunday preachers going into these obscure and interesting points about what's in the book. And really, the book then seems inscrutable unless you have this interpreter to help you understand the book, which is the transmission of truth, and you must be obedient to this truth. So there's a great social conditioning that goes into this, even though we're not putting the butts in the pews like we used to. It is still a function deep in our cultural background, I believe. And it is one where, in fact, the wisdom of insecurity is not where people want to be. It is in some ways to diminish any sense of anxiety and insecurity. And I have the answer for you.
Right.
I have the answer for you.
Right, right. Well, and I think in the reading that I did from the Adorno's book, The Authoritarian Personality, Authoritarian Submission, they mentioned conservative, political, and religious submission. Anyone else?
Oh, here you go.
I have more of a question. I have a question, and that is people that are complicit with this authoritarian, what percentage of them themselves are of an authoritarian personality, and are there other personality types that are part of this? Because we always look at complicity as what tips the scale. In elections. It's a complicity, and you did touch on it with the 30%, but there's some other variables here that I think are really part of this bigger picture of how an authoritarian grabs a culture, and those that sit back and just don't do anything, and then they say, well, they're innocent, but they don't do anything.
Right, right. I'm sure there is a gradation of the true believers. Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, about the people who are basically disenfranchised being the source of so much of the marching troops for authoritarianism. But then it grades out more and more and more. And I don't know that there is any, well, California F-scale probably might give a little indication of whether the person is a true believer or whether he kind of goes along, because there are people who will go along because you get along by going along. And I am fairly certain that some of the people I see in national politics are smarter than they let on, but they're going along because they're paid to do so, blah, blah, blah. So, and yeah, it's a good question. There are certainly other things involved, without the slightest doubt.
Frank,
Kevin.
I have a question about the relationship of these 9 characteristics to Carl Jung's archetypes. And for me, I see the hero and I see the ruler in here. I'm wondering what other archetypes is evident in this that we might take a look at from looking at from the Jungian lens along with the F scale. see if you have a comment
Right,
on that.
that's an excellent question. What occurred to me also is the warrior.
Okay.
The archetype of the warrior, Ares among the Greek gods, Mars among the Roman gods. So there's a lot going on. My hieroglyphics are becoming weaker, not stronger, as the evening goes along. But let's take a few moments, and I'll give you, because Jim asked some excellent questions. If we think about Carl Jung, superstition, how about that, and symbolic structures, and so forth. And so let's take, would anyone like to raise an issue at the moment, or shall I just take off and then we'll land in about 25 minutes at the latest? Okay. So here is my 30,000 foot view of Carl Jung's structure, but even more important than the structure is his way of dealing. The analysts, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, the first analysts, were all interested, as I see it, in conflict. And the authoritarian personality stuff also has to do in an important way with conflict. But what's different, in my view, is the way of approaching that conflict and what you do with it. So I'm gonna do a little bit of stuff that may not be exactly orthodox, and I will expect, we have some real authorities on Jung in the room this evening. I'm not one of them. But I will sketch a little bit out and hope to illustrate that this is a quite completely different way of dealing with conflict than the authoritarian personality chooses when he's in full flight. Okay, so Carl Jung, not easy for me to read in his scholarly works. There are two books that I find I would encourage anyone who has not yet confronted them to read, because they are quite easily read. One is his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And the other is the wonderful picture book, Man and His Symbols. It kind of gives you a clue. Some of the more obscure writings are more obscure. And so, okay, so what do we have with, what structures does Jung work with? Three fundamental ones, three. The self. And the self, as I perceive it, is is present before the ego. This is an ancient existing reality. Your breastbone, it pulls you towards something, which gives meaning. Now, it contains many things, and I won't do the list, but one of them famously out there, archetypes. Kind of out there. And then there is within each of us what Jung calls the ego. Not the same thing that Freud means by ego. The ego is more or less, as I understand it, our conscious awareness of ourself. What we mean when we say I. And I've heard it's interesting exercise to ask a group of people to point to themselves. They won't necessarily all point to the same anatomical part. But So then there is the process. How does this, and this is, become actualized in life? Because the ego realizing the archetypes, realizing in both senses of the term what's there, what's in life for me, what things activate the people around me, activate nature, so on. And so there is, and often it happens, that a structure within the ego, perhaps an archetype of some kind, the warrior. In my case, it might be, what? The name of the Greek god, Hermes. Hermes, the messenger. Hermes, who guards the boundary line. You know, I mean, and it sort of seems to be a part of me. I mean, people will come into my life, and they'll be there for a while. And then, when they've transitioned into whatever next is for them, they will not be there anymore. It seems so. How does the ego reconcile and grow with respect to a larger reality? And that process of individuation, the ego becomes larger in a sense because there's more than I thought. There's more to me than I thought. So, and that often actually that process can involve conflict. You know, maybe if I become concerned, that then I might emphasize even more the aspect of the boundary God. And I will neglect or even denigrate other archetypes which might be helpful to me. They are outside of my consciousness. That's where they are. And so, and this is true even when we have a different structure, as far as I can tell. All the analysts, Freud, Jung, Adler, and those in the psychoanalytic tradition, find it the way to deal with conflict, to try to reach some truthful accommodation with the various forces. Sometimes the analyst will need to become a kind of adversary, a kind of advocating things that, I don't know about that. And Jungians sometimes write in terms of individuation and anti-individuation. Right? Psychoanalysts write in terms of insight and resistance. But the idea is to become closer to reality as I see it, and it is not to become superstition, mystical beliefs. If they bring us closer to reality, then they become helpful. And they are things that, since they are real, since they are true, we might well be best to try to incorporate those in our lives. Though it's difficult often, there's a reason we've kept them at a distance, generally speaking. So, and that, in my view, with each of these is a difference. Authoritarian submission, if it becomes single-minded, one-dimensional, it can get us into trouble. And we might bring that to an analyst, psychoanalyst. And they will work through that with us. It is a difficult accommodation. It involves conflict, but not the externalization of conflict. Okay, you know, it's you, Bill. You are the one who is causing me this trouble, and so on. I can attack you, I can vilify you. That will not bring us enlargement, generally speaking. So it's that sort of difference that the analysts seek to help the person find truth, and the authoritarian seeks to involve the person in submission. That's my quick take on it. So I will relinquish the floor at the moment and invite any. There's more to be said about this stuff, but we've said a lot tonight. So I will be seated and allow anyone to clear the floor so anybody can make comments, observations, and the like.
I'd say a big motivator for all those parties, and all of our parties, is power. And when the authoritarian arises, power and the opportunity for power arises with it.
I might, are you finished?
Yeah.
I might throw this in because it was most interesting to me. The one question is, do these things just obtain with right-wing authoritarianism, or are they also true with left-wing authoritarianism? There's an interesting, what I've read so far, it's not in this book is too early for that, is that the people who score lowest on authoritarianism, of all of the work, the groups with which Adorno and his followers survey, the people who score lowest on authoritarianism are British university students who self-identify as communists. For what it's worth.
Yeah, so it seems like authoritarianism really relies on trying to create as big a bucket that captures all of these elements, but can kind of homogenize as large a population as possible. And so that's why there's a degradation of education and intellectualism and being able to seek your own truth, you know? And so I think that also speaks to kind of the Jungian experience where, you know, maybe dreams are kind of intersecting with your own personal understanding and your own growth at your own pace. Like that would really fly in the face of an authoritarian.
Yeah. Follow your bliss is not exactly authoritarian advice. I wanted to, something that you said brought it up to me, and I'm not sure I can find it in my notes. And here I know what it says. I can paraphrase it. These things are correlated with each other, but they're also correlated with low educational attainment. One researcher asks the question, is this the default worldview of less educated people in industrial societies? Is this kind of where they feel like they are? So therefore, when somebody recognizes that, they're ready to go. Ah, I see the light. But, you know, what your statement brought brought that to my attention again.
Yeah, Kevin brought up, he was kind of curious like what unique archetypes were in here, and I was kind of thinking, well, Jung was actually close. He was in Switzerland. I mean, at the time this was going on. You said that book was written in the 1950s. It's kind of a...
This book, yes.
I kind of want to understand what was going on in Germany at the time, and I think about that all the time. I had a good history professor, and he made a good point. Like, he would always say, like, well, you think you wouldn't do the same? He said, you think you're all Schindler? Like in that movie Schindler's List? You think you're all going to be Schindler, resisting and saving all the Jews? It's like, no, if you were born at that time in Germany, you would be following the lines as well. So it's kind of having a lot of compassion and sympathy and understanding of how could someone sign up for that. How I likely would as well if I was in Germany at that time. Like, I don't think I'm Schindler. Like, I'm being completely honest. And I think about that. Like, what were the Germans, like, how did they end up getting there? And Jung actually wrote a book on it, or a paper. He was like, it was on Wotan. He thought that the German people were captured by the archetype of Wotan, which was a German word for the god of Odin, which was, he was kind of alluding to earlier, it was like the air energy of Mars, or Ares. And yeah, that kind of, when I read that, it all kind of clicked together. Like, the German people were in such a helpless, downtrodden place from the Depression after World War I, and their economy couldn't get out, and they needed some way out, and they needed that energy of Wotan, and then Hitler kind of just personified it, and it was like the answer. He was kind of like, they just needed that energy, and the people were totally captured by it. I think if you're all curious about it, I can't remember the details of it, but Jung wrote about it pretty well, about the archetype of Wotan and how the German people, that's what kind of, because he was there at the time. He was writing about it. I think he wrote it around 1936, as when this was all stirring up. And I was listening to a good Jungian analyst the other day, and they were saying how Trump really personifies the trickster archetype. And you hit on it a little bit up there with cynicism. And like, our society, like, Trump didn't happen by accident, like, the trickster comes in when there needs to be some chaos, and like, when there's a lot of moral self-righteousness and what's right and wrong, and I'm right and they're wrong. Trump just came in and said, like, I'm wrong and I know it, and you guys are all gonna vote for me. And they did. Like, he was like the antidote for not the antidote, but like the natural reaction of the culture. Like, he didn't come out of a vacuum. And he kind of represents the trickster, like coyote energy, just like the disruptor. Like, doesn't care he's wrong. I could kill someone on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't matter. I can grab him right by the vagina, and he's on tape saying that.
Yep.
And people voted, and they voted for him again.
Yep.
So all these moral righteousness of, misogyny and women, like, the country voted for him. Like, showing that they needed that energy of disruption, because there was a little bit too much righteousness and order. And I was like, I don't know. They made a really good case of it. I don't remember who it was, but it all kind of made a lot of sense of him as being like the trickster archetype.
Well, H.L. Mencken said, what the people vote for, they deserve to get, good and strong.
Yeah.
There are a couple, you raised excellent points, that there are external elements that can strengthen this way of doing things and strengthen the readiness for it. And a material want, I think people are burdened, especially men, by being told, you support your family. And the society doesn't cough up enough money to clothe and shelter. And deprivations in the areas that are like the 4 C's, connect, capable, count, and courage. I think there are quite a few people in our society who are quite alienated, and they don't think they don't connect, they don't feel they're capable, they don't feel their count, that they're important, and they don't see how they can muster the courage to work their way out of it.
Powerful leader.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, why don't you go ahead and then we'll get the gentleman in back.
Oh, okay. I believe that we have to look at numerous archetypes when we're trying to understand not only the authoritarian in charge, but the other authoritarian people in that, like the cabinet or whatever, and then the voters, which in terms of individuation, we all are on our own individual path. And we're, to some extent trying to be individuated. Few are really focusing on it full time with their dreams and their archetypes and really going deep with this stuff. But I think we have to look at a combination of archetypes when we're looking at either our leaders or the followers, or the people that are sitting back and are complicit because they're don't want to watch the news, don't want to be involved. You can't trust anybody. It's the one that steps back and does nothing. Each of those has a combination of archetypes that they are operating under. And what? That's right. It's a complex. And each of us is powerless over anybody else's path. We think we are. We try to fix them, but we really are.
Right.
We can be a little bit of a coach, a little bit of a supporter, but if that person doesn't have the passion for the growth, for the individuation, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
And, why did we all come to the planet at this time? That's a question that we can only ask ourselves. Why did we show up? What are we really supposed to be doing? And anyway, that's my philosophy.
Well, and the person coming to a Jungian analyst, I think the task would be to try to sort that out.
Sure.
And see what help insight could offer to the process. As Jung said, quite in accord with what you were saying, you can't do it for somebody else or harry them into it, that there are natural processes, and Jung said, we depend on these processes. Analysis can help, perhaps.
It seems to me that we're indulging in a case study now. We're all part of a case study, watching what's happening. And I think a few things that we haven't brought to the fore, for example, right now, is this sense of inflation and megalomania that is so intense. And I don't think I understood the concept of narcissism as much as I would read it and hear about it until I saw it on a world scale, almost a cosmic scale, that we're seeing exhibited. So, this I am your retribution.
Right.
There's, if we were to track his statements, some of the behaviors that were discussed here in terms of living outside the norms and people sort of explaining it, finally to the point of him being the anointed one, that he turned his head just at that moment when the bullet missed him, that this is in fact the statement of he is the carrier of the message for us. What they say is, yes, he has all these behaviors, but we forgive them because he is doing the work. He is the representative on earth. God chooses sometimes flawed characters to carry out the mission. So I think an exploration of that, moving then into what is the nature of cults, cult
Cults.
behavior, that what we have is a cult leader, and I would assume that cult leaders would have a lot of these traits of the authoritarian personality to be able to take on that mantle, and then how, and I think we've been discussing it, but I don't think it's as clear, to me at least, of how the megalomaniac cult leader who is called forth by the times and fits with the people's needs.
Yeah.
And I think that interaction is really worthy of some deep analysis.
Well, it reminds me, my watch just went off, which means, this is God's time. It's told at 8 o'clock. Reminds me of speaking of God, the time when the chosen people were petitioning through Moses for what they wanted, and they said, "We want a king. All the other people have a king. We want a king." And God said, "Okay, I'll give it to you, but you're not going to like it." I'd like to just close with a reading from someone I've become recently aware of, who gave her life in the opposition to the Nazi inflation in World War II. More research comes out and digs up more people who sacrifice and people who have achieved something in the way of individuation. And I think sometimes we look and you kind of get a whiff of it. You can't say for sure. You kind of get a whiff of it. Perhaps some of you have heard of Sophie Scholl, who was with the White Rose Resistance, a group of university students. And the Gestapo found her out very quickly and imprisoned her and condemned her to death. And I'd like to just read a passage because it carries a whiff of nobility, of her last words to her cellmate. She said, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? It is such a splendid sunny day, and I have to go. But how many have to die on the battlefield in these days? How many young, promising lives? What does death matter if by our acts thousands are warned and alerted? Among the student body, there will certainly be a revolt." And her last words to her parents were, "I'll see you soon." And her last words, period, seemed to be, "The sun's still shining." And that, I think she's done her work. Thank you.